talk about the Democratic Party and cutting child poverty, because to me, cutting child poverty, this idea is a capitalist smoke and mirrors. Because how can you cut child poverty without cutting the parents' poverty? That's, to me, is absurd on its face. Is that, I mean, it's like, and it's funny, I give this analogy all the time. It's like, so I show up to a parent who's in poverty, their house looks like poverty, and then when I go in the kids' room, it's like steaks and big screen TVs. Is that what's happening? It's not. It's like,
that's right.
So it's absurd to believe, in my opinion, that there is even a possibility of cutting child poverty when they live with parents who are in poverty. That just, to me, logically doesn't make sense. And let me play the video now, let you comment.
I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful thing. Pandemic and the relief bill. I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful thing.
And that, and I must say, Dr. West, this was the most asked question from our last time you were on here, when they heard you say that, and we weren't able, time-wise, I wasn't able to get, I wasn't able to get in and ask you to clarify what you meant. But this was the number one thing that was asked. It was like, what is he talking about? That's not a thing, cutting child poverty. So what everything I said, do you want to, can you speak to that, or what do you mean, or further give further details about your what you're thinking on cutting child poverty without cutting parent poverty?
Right. I mean, one is that it raises questions about the categories that we use. Can we use a category of child poverty that in some way is separated from the poverty of the parents themselves? Now, social scientists do have different ways of measuring this. Oftentimes they're very arbitrary and unconvincing, but they do have ways of measuring this. Marion Wright Edelman, as you know, Children's Defense Fund, the whole project was around child poverty. It was not so much around the poverty of the parents. And the child poverty was always higher. Child poverty, 23%. Right? Parents using 18%, for Black folks, 39%. For children, they say for everyday Black folk who are adults, it's around 21%. So it's always much higher. So they must have some indices or criteria that allows them to make these different kinds of claims. So then when they had the relief bill and they gave the money directly to the parents for use for children, right, within those few months, the child poverty did go down. They didn't measure so much the parents' poverty, but the child poverty did go down because they had billions and billions of dollars that went directly into the homes so that food security would be able to be addressed more effectively. And that happened during that bill. Then they allowed the bill to expire. So it was clear they had no fundamental commitment. That's the end of that particular dialogue that I had with Sister Savvy, right? That it was clear they had no commitment to trying to alleviate child poverty, but they happened to cut it in half. And that was something that people were talking about statistically, empirically, social scientists and others. That's what I had in mind.
I was one of the people that received these cut. So I'm basically just saying, I'll give it to you, Nick. I'm basically saying even these social scientists that come up with these ideas are living in a capitalist system and they believe in capitalism too. So it's not, to me, it's not an effective argument that capitalist social scientists have come up with these smoke and mirrors sort of ways to measure child poverty. It's very simple. The child is living in poverty if their parents are. It's very simple. You know what I mean? This is what capitalists in the professional managerial class does. They find these ways to sort of make capitalism seem better, or we just need to fix the edges. Oh, it's just child poverty and we just need to do that. And I'll pass it to you, Nick. How can you cut child poverty temporarily? So they were just not broke for 3 months and then 6 months and then went back. That's so, yeah, that's not how poverty works. That's it. But go ahead, Nick. You were going to say.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
The biggest criticism, I'll be very short. The biggest criticism of your statement, you said it on the show, but there was so much to unpack on what you said, and we didn't have a lot of time, so we didn't have a lot of time to address it. The big thing that perked my eyebrows up, I think a lot of the criticism comes from when you said, I give Biden credit. And what I would say, we don't have to give him credit, especially if we are running as an opposition, because that study that said that he was going to cut child poverty, it was tied to the minimum wage increase that did not happen. That did not happen. So then, despite they lied about that. So the minimum wage increase supposed to happen. That was supposed to cut child poverty because that addressed the parent issue that CJ's talking about. So the Democratic line about this always was a lie. We need to understand. And then also, now, as someone who don't accept establishment talking points on face value, I am a Marxist. I'm a socialist. I'm talking about what actually is quality of life. What actually is poverty? Because I looked at the poverty tables. You know what they say. A lot of these institutions say if you're a single mother with 2 kids and you're making $23,000 a year, you're technically out of poverty. That's a joke.
Well, we know
are these the institutions we listen to? Are we listening to these institutions to define poverty for us? So let's say you did get cash after the child tax credit. You're a single mom making $23,000 a year with 2 kids. Congrats, you had $26,000 a year now. How you really lifted her out of poverty? No, you did not under my standards.
No.
So I think that, and you do make a good point when you do mention how Biden was not serious about it. But the criticism is when you get them credit when you don't have to. You understand? Anyway, if you want to respond to that, you can.
Yeah, no, I hear what you all are saying. No, I do have to correct myself in terms of the language. I mean, I don't really mind giving people credit when credit is due. I don't care who they are, whether they're friends, enemies, foes, or what have you. If one can show a causal connection between a relief bill that has some kind of positive effect on poor people, even within a rotten capitalist system, even within a framework where they're full of neoliberal lies that have been hidden and rendered the misery hidden and concealed, if that bill can be shown to have some positive impact, then I just acknowledge that truth. That's just a truth that one has to come to terms with and say, no, it's a concession from the struggles of poor people and working people, and concessions can be real. There's no doubt about that. That's like the Civil Rights Bill, right? Do we give LBJ credit for signing the bill? Yes, but the bill itself is a result of decades and decades of struggle of poor people and working people putting pressure on these indifferent elites in the White House. You see. So that I don't really mind giving credit. But the problem is, and you all are pushing me on this, rightly so, that if our categories of child poverty, parent poverty, how you define poverty, and we know there's been a lot of debate of that in the social sciences. And we got the Marxist social scientists who say, look, so much of this stuff is just, shenanigans and smoke and mirrors. But we have to have some way of trying to get a sense of what do we mean when we talk about percentage of poverty. In 1939, during the Depression, 50% of America lived in poverty, 75% of Black people lived in poverty. Now, however you define poverty, poverty is less now than it was then. And we have to tell a story about how that came about. That was not because of the charitable dispositions of the ruling class. No, you got trade union movements, you got Black freedom movements, you got farmers movements, all this pressure being brought to bear, you see. And I think that's true today. We do have various kind of pressures being brought to bear. But I don't want to go on, but I do hear you all's point, and I've got to check myself in the language that I use. But you do see my point in terms of
I see.
Credit's due.
Can I speak on that? Can I speak on that? Because
go ahead. I'll go after you. Go ahead.
It'll be the same thing of us giving credit to Abraham Lincoln for freeing the slaves. Like that's not, you don't deserve credit.
But that's different.
You get what I'm saying? That I look at that. I look at it the same. Go ahead, Dr. Russ.
What
go ahead.
we do is we give Abraham Lincoln credit for signing the Emancipation Proclamation. He didn't free the slaves. The slaves freed themselves. It was 200,000 Black soldiers he wanted the army to break the back of the Confederate Army. But he did sign the thing. So that the signing is qualitatively different than him being the liberator. We had this debate around Juneteenth when they read the Emancipation Proclamation. This ain't no gift to Black people.
No,
at all. You didn't have the Black soldiers leaving the plantation. 200,000 left in months. The Confederacy could have won. And it's complicated because you had all Mexico, and at that time, Maximilian was French. He was pro-slavery. So many of the slave holders had come to Texas because their states were being rendered chaotic. And so Texas was even more pro-slavery. So it wasn't that they didn't hear, it was that they still had militia that was keeping black folk under. They knew what was going on. They didn't have the power. You see what I mean?
Gotcha.
So that we have to just be honest about the forces at work, the social forces at work that are bringing certain kind of pressure to bear. So you are absolutely right about Lincoln. But did Lincoln sign the thing? Yes, he did sign it. Did LBJ sign it? Yes, he did sign it. He was forced to sign it. The pressures were such that he would sign it. Did LBJ plan to sign it in 1960 if he were president? Ain't no way.
Probably not.
What did Lincoln say in the first inaugural? I compromised with the Confederate. I'm willing to reconcile with them. He said, hey, they're dedicated to enslaving black people in perpetuity. He said, I'll go with that. What did Frederick Douglass call him? A slave hound from Illinois. I have nothing to do with him. That's the first inaugural. Second inaugural is different. The pressures on Lincoln such that he had to respond, and therefore he ends up doing some more progressive things he hadn't planned on doing. Well, that's what history is when in terms of struggle on the ground.
Now,
okay, go ahead, Nick.
I just want to respond just to the credit thing, because I don't think anyone will fault you in your temperament and your ability to be civil. The reason why we don't get credit, because we are in a process of a negotiation. So when we're fighting during the relief bill and we screaming on top of our heads that the Democratic Party is not doing enough for the working class, the last thing we're going to do is pat them on the back while we still negotiating for stuff like, and that gives them, oh, you giving us credit? Yeah, we did enough. No. We still in the middle of negotiation. This shit not done. So I actually like there's I'm not going to criticize the human part of you of wanting to have conversations and be civil with people that are Democrats who need a gentle landing on this. But in terms of the strategy that we have and what we need to accomplish during this tough task of getting people to turn away from the two-party duopoly, you need to take advantage of any kind of situation. So I understand what you're talking about when it comes to giving credit, but I'm just speaking about in terms of like we need to keep the pressure going. You understand?